His lawyer slid the final document across the table. My husband, Marcus, my husband of 12 years, picked up his gold pen, the one I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary, and prepared to sign away his entire future. And then his phone buzzed. One text message. That is all it took. Marcus looked down at his screen. His smile vanished. His hand stopped midair, pen hovering over the paper. I watched the color drain from his face in real time, watched his eyes flick from the phone to the document to me, sitting there in my cheap navy dress, looking like exactly what he thought I was. Defeated, broken, out of moves. He didn't know I'd been planning this moment for 4 years. 4 years of smiling at dinner parties while knowing the truth. 4 years of pretending I didn't know about the other apartment, the other name, the other life. But I am getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how I got here, how a woman, everyone pitied the sad housewife. The discarded first wife was actually playing the longest game of her life. My name is Elena Voss. I am 36 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was married to Marcus Cole. 12 years. That is how long I was Mrs. Marcus Cole. Longer than some careers, longer than some people keep their first car. Definitely longer than my sanity should have lasted. But I am a patient woman. I get that from my mother. I met Marcus when I was 20, fresh out of community college with an associate's degree in business administration that everyone told me was cute, but not particularly useful. I got a job at Cole & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Portland, entry level, data entry coffee runs, the occasional desperate attempt to make the copier stop making that grinding noise. Marcus was 26, the Golden Marqueshe Sadiam, son of the founder, recently promoted to junior partner, already being groomed to take over the whole operation. He walked through the office like he owned the air everyone breathed. And I suppose, in a way, he did. We started talking because I caught a $40,000 error in a client file he'd prepared. Not his fault. Someone had transposed numbers in the source documents, but I noticed it. I always notice the numbers. How did you see that? He asked me, genuinely surprised. I like patterns. I said, numbers tell the truth. Tell the truth. He laughed. I didn't realize until later how much that sentence would define our entire marriage. We were married within 8 months. I was 21. Marcus was 21. Marcus was 27. His mother, Vivian Cole, made it very clear that she considered me suitable in the way you might describe a comfortable pair of shoes. Functional, unthreatening, easy to replace, easy to replace. She wasn't wrong about that last part. She just had the timeline backwards. For the first 5 years, I worked at the firm full-time while Marcus built his client base. I wasn't a CPA, couldn't be without the full degree, but I was good at the work nobody else wanted. Reconciliations, compliance documentation, client onboarding paperwork, the invisible infrastructure that keeps an accounting firm running. I kept working after our daughter, Sophie, was born. Marcus wanted me to quit, but I negotiated a compromise. 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. I handled the schedules, the billing, the vendor relationships. I knew every client's quirks, every deadline, every potential problem before it became a crisis. At year 6, Marcus's father retired. Marcus became managing partner, and he sat me down at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd proposed, the same table where we'd planned our wedding, the same table where I'd eventually sign away my old life, and he made me an offer. Quit the firm, he said. Be my partner full-time, handle the operations, the personnel, the client relationships. I'll handle the strategy and the rainmaking. He made it sound like a promotion, like we were building something together. I said yes. For 6 years, I was the coup of Cole & Associates. Unpaid. Of course, my official title was office manager on the org chart, but I did everything. I hired and fired. I managed the 8 upgrades and the office renovation. I planned the holiday parties and the client appreciation events. I remembered birthdays and dietary restrictions and the names of everyone's children. Marcus got the credit. Marcus got the industry awards. Marcus got the profile in Portland Business Monthly with the glossy photo and the quote about building a legacy. At every event, I was Marcus's wife. At every celebration, he thanked his mentors, his team, his vision. Somehow, he never quite got around to thanking me. But I told myself it didn't matter. We were building something. We were a team. The recognition was just delayed. Eventually, he'd see what I contributed. Eventually, he'd acknowledge the work. Eventually never came instead. Things started to shift. Small things at first. Marcus making decisions without consulting me. Streamlining the chain of command, he called it. Staying late at the office more and more often. Criticizing things he'd never cared about before. My clothes, my hair, my lack of ambition. I was running his entire operation for free while raising our daughter and managing our household. But sure, not ambitious enough. The discovery happened on a Thursday, the 14th of November, 2022. I'll never forget the date. Marcus was working late again. He'd been working late a lot that year, 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. He said we were preparing for a big audit, that the hours were temporary, that I should be supportive of his dedication. I was supportive. I was always supportive. That Thursday, I was at the office until 7 finishing payroll. Everyone else had gone home. I was locking up when I noticed Marcus's computer was still on in his private office. He'd left in a hurry client emergency. He'd texted and forgotten to shut it down. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. Privacy, trust, all the things a good wife is supposed to have. But I'd been feeling it for months, that creeping sensation that something was wrong, that the numbers didn't add up, that the man I was married I was becoming a stranger. So I looked. It took me 30 seconds to find the first email. Can't wait to see you tonight. The apartment feels empty without you. You doubt you. It took me another 2 hours to find everything else. The apartment in the Pearl District, $3,200 a month, paid from a separate account. I'd never seen the name Julian Vance, the history, 2 years. 2 years of my husband living a second life while I managed his first one. Julian was younger than me, 28 to my 32. He worked in marketing. I'd seen him at a firm holiday party once, attached to the arm of a client we later lost. Marcus must have met him then, must have decided that he wanted something different. Someone who didn't know him when he was still building, still proving himself. Someone who looked at him like he was already the finished product. I found the photos, the trips, San Francisco, Palm Springs, a long weekend in Cabo that Marcus had told me was a solo retreat to recharge. I found the gifts. The watch I'd thought was a self-indulgent splurge, actually an anniversary present from Julian. The late nights at the office, dinners, concerts, the life I thought we were too busy for. I sat in Marcus's office chair, the ergonomic one I'd researched and ordered for him, and I did the math. 2 years. 24 months. Approximately 180 nights he'd spent with Julian while I put our daughter to bed alone, while I answered client emails at midnight, while I told myself we were building something worth the sacrifice. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have driven to that apartment in the Pearl District and confronted them both. But I didn't. Instead, I opened Marcus's financial files aisle. Because if there was one thing I knew about my husband, it was this. Marcus never did anything halfway. If he was living a double life, he was funding a double life. And Marcus had never been good at hiding money from someone who knew how to look. What I found that night and in the weeks that followed wasn't just an affair. It was a financial catastrophe wearing an affair. Marcus had been creative. That is the generous word. The accurate word is reckless. The apartment in the Pearl District was just the beginning. There was the car, a leased BMW that Julian drove, $680 a month, that Marcus had buried in a client entertainment line item. There were the trips, the gifts, the consulting fees to a marketing freelancer who didn't exist except as a shell for Marcus's personal spending. But that was small money. That was affair money. I kept digging, and I found the real problem. Cole & Associates wasn't the stable, successful firm everyone believed it to be. Marcus had been leveraging our assets, our home, the business line of credit, his personal investments, to fund a series of strategic expansions that were actually desperate gambles. A commercial real estate investment in 2020-21, $400,000 from a second mortgage on our house. Marcus had told me we were refinancing for a better rate. A technology partnership in 2022, $250,000 from a business loan secured by our receivables. I'd signed the paperwork without reading it carefully. Marcus needed my signature as office manager for the corporate resolution. He'd rushed me, said it was urgent, said the lender needed it today. Cryptocurrency investments through a shell LLC, $150,000 I'd found the wallet addresses in his browser history. The value when I checked, approximately $23,000 and $127,000 loss he had mentioned. Personal loans from friends that were actually high interest private financing, $200,000 total with balloon payments coming due in 2024. I stayed up until 4 a.m, cross-referencing accounts, tracing transactions, building a spreadsheet that grew to 17 tabs. By dawn, I had the full picture to total debt, $1.4 million total liquid assets, $89,000. The house, our beautiful craftsman in Laurelhurst that everyone admired, that we'd renovated room by room, that I'd imagined Sophie growing up in was leveraged to 94% of its value. One market correction away from underwater. The business Cole & Associates, Marcus's legacy, was technically insolvent. The only reason it hadn't collapsed was because Marcus had been robbing Peter to pay Paul, using new client retainers to cover old debts, floating on reputation and hope. And Marcus didn't know I knew that was the crucial piece. He thought he was hiding the affair. He had no idea. He'd also exposed the financial house of cards. I made a decision that night not to confront it for him, not to leave him, not to save him, to wait. Because I knew Marcus, I'd watched him operate for 12 years. If I confronted him about Julian, he'd spin it. He'd apologize. He'd promise to change. He'd suggest counseling. He'd make me feel unreasonable for being angry about one mistake while ignoring the 2-year pattern. If I confronted him about the money, he'd panic. He'd try to consolidate control to move assets to protect himself. He might even try to drag me into the liability claim I'd known, approved, participated in the decisions that led us here. And if I left him immediately, I risked everything. Community property state. Yes, but Marcus was the named owner on everything. The house, the business, the debts. I'd spent 6 years as an employee of my own marriage with no salary. Number 401k contributions, no separate credit history. A divorce now would mean fighting for half of nothing, or worse, half of negative nothing. So I waited. I smiled. I played the role of the busy, slightly distracted wife who trusted her husband completely, and I prepared. The first thing I did was protect Sophie. My mother had died when I was 24, leaving me $280,000 in life, insurance, and investment accounts. I'd kept that money separate, always, not secret. Marcus knew it existed, but separate, in my name only. Never used for household expenses, never commingled with marital funds. My mother had been a bookkeeper for 40 years. She understood what it meant for a woman to have her own money. Not hidden money, she told me when I got married. Just yours. Something nobody can take, even if they take everything else. I moved that money first, transferred it to a trust in Sophie's name with my sister as trustee and me as guardian. Irrevocable, untouchable. By the time I was done, Sophie had $340,000 secured for college, for a first home, for whatever future she needed. Marcus never noticed. Why would he? It was money he never considered his. Then I documented everything. Every mortgage document, every loan agreement, every suspicious transaction. I printed copies and stored them at my sister's house in Beaverton. I scanned everything and uploaded it to 3 separate cloud accounts. I kept a physical binder in my office at Cole & Associates, locked in a filing cabinet that only I had the key to. I learned the law. I spent nights reading Oregon divorce statutes, community property case law, precedents on hidden assets and marital debt. I consulted with 3 different attorneys, always using a fake name, always paying cash until I found one who understood what I was trying to do. Her name was Rebecca Chen, 45 years old, family law specialist, with a reputation for being difficult, which usually meant she didn't tolerate nonsense from opposing counsel. When I finally told her my real name and my real situation, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like I was a chess player who just revealed a queen sacrifice. "You've known about this for how long?" she asked. 4 years, I said, almost 4 years. "And you didn't confront him? Didn't leave, Val? Leaves waiting for him to leave me?" She stared at me for a long moment, Zane. Then she smiled. "Mrs. Cole, I believe I owe you an apology. When you first described your situation, I thought you were a victim who didn't know how to get out. Now I see you are a strategist who is waiting for the right battlefield." I liked her immediately. Rebecca explained the law. In Oregon, marital debts are divided equitably, not necessarily equally, but fairly based on circumstances. However, if one spouse assumes all marital assets in a divorce settlement, they typically assume all associated liabilities as well. The key was in the documentation. If Marcus knowingly, voluntarily accepted the house and the business, he would also be accepting the mortgages, the loans, the obligations attached to them. And if he doesn't know, I asked, then he should have done his due diligence, Rebecca said. "You can't hide assets in a divorce, Mrs. Cole, but you don't have to announce liabilities he hasn't bothered to discover, especially not liabilities attached to property he is demanding you relinquish." The plan was simple. Marcus would leave me eventually. Men like him always do. They get bored, or they fall in love, or they decide they deserve a fresh start without the baggage of their old life. When he left, he would expect to keep everything. The house, the business, the life we'd built. He would offer me a settlement generous by his standards, insulting by any objective measure, and he would expect gratitude for his fairness. I would let him. I would ask for almost nothing. I would seem broken, defeated, too exhausted to fight. And in exchange for everything, he would get exactly what he'd built, a financial disaster with his name on every document. 4 years. That is how long I waited, is how long I waited. 4 years of watching Marcus dig deeper, spend more, hide bigger. 4 years of smiling at Julian at firm events, because of course Marcus eventually brought him around, introduced him as a marketing consultant, expected me to be too stupid to recognize my own replacement. 4 years of pretending not to notice when Marcus came home smelling of Julian's cologne. 4 years of scheduling dentist appointments and parent-teacher conferences and remembering that Vivian Cole preferred orchids to roses for her birthday. 4 years of being underestimated, of being invisible, of being the dull, dependable wife who was too loyal to leave and too stupid to know what was happening. And in those 4 years, Ivy became very good at patience, very good at pretending, very good at watching my husband destroy himself while believing he was building a future. Sophie noticed eventually. She is perceptive, my daughter. She was 11. When Marcus finally asked for the divorce, old enough to understand that something was wrong without knowing exactly what, "Why don't you and Dad talk anymore?" she asked me one night, about 2 years into my waiting period. "We're both busy," I said. "Running the firm takes a lot of energy. But you used to talk, you used to laugh." I looked at her, this brilliant, observant child who'd inherited my eye for patterns and her father's charm. And I made a decision. I wouldn't lie to her, but I wouldn't burden her either. Sometimes, I said carefully, grown-ups grow in different directions. Your dad and I are still figuring out if we're growing together or apart. But whatever happens, you are the most important thing to both of us. That never changes. She accepted that for a while, but Sophie kept watching, kept noticing, kept asking questions that were too perceptive for her age. I started preparing her too, quietly, teaching her about money, about independence, about the difference between looking successful and being secure. I opened a savings account in her name, funded from the trust that she knew about and managed herself. Small amounts, but enough to teach her responsibility. I wanted her to be ready, whatever happened. I wanted my daughter to understand her own worth. It happened on a Tuesday, the 12th of March, 2024. I'll remember that date too. Marcus came home early. I was in the kitchen making dinner, his favorite, because I was apparently a glutton for unappreciated effort. When he walked in with that look on his face, not sad, not guilty, just businesslike, like he was about to propose a merger he expected to be accepted without negotiation. "Elena, we need to talk." I turned off the stove. I knew. I'd known for weeks that it was coming. Marcus had been more distant than usual, more critical, more obviously performing his dissatisfaction for an audience of one. "I want a divorce," he said. Then without pausing, "I want that pausing. The business, the accounts, everything. You can have Sophie full-time. I'll pay standard child support. I'll give you $75,000 to get started somewhere new." He said it like he was ordering from a menu. "I'll have the assets. Hold the child. Thanks." I stared at him. 12 years of marriage, and this was how it ended, at our kitchen table, between the salt shaker and the butter dish, like I was just another item he was discarding. "You want everything?" I repeated, making my voice small, broken. Exactly what he expected. "Elena, be reasonable. I built the firm. I paid for this house. I've been the breadwinner for our entire marriage. You were my support system, and I appreciate that, but the assets are mine. I am being more than fair offering you anything at all." He actually believed this. He'd rewritten our entire history in his head, turned my 6 years of unpaid labor into support, erased my contributions to his success, his reputation, his operational infrastructure. And he expected gratitude for his $75,000. $75,000 for 12 years of work, for raising his child, for building his life while he built a second one. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I let my eyes fill with tears. I let my hands tremble. I looked down at the table and whispered, "I need time to think." "Of course," he said, magnanimous in victory. "Take a few days." "But, Elena, don't make this difficult. I have an excellent lawyer. You don't want to drag this out." He patted my shoulder as he left the room, actually patted me, like I was a dog who'd performed a disappointing trick. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I'd been waiting for this conversation for 4 years. I'd rehearsed my reaction, practiced my trembling hands in front of a mirror, calculated exactly how much resistance to show before seeming to collapse. He thought he was winning. He had no idea the game had started 4 years ago, and I was already 3 moves from checkmate. The next 3 months were an acting performance worthy of an award I will never receive. Marcus moved fast. Within a week, he'd hired Richard Holloway, one of Portland's most expensive divorce attorneys, a man known for aggressive asset protection. Within 2 weeks, I was moved to the guest room in my own home. Within 3, Marcus started bringing Julian around openly. Julian walked into my kitchen like he owned it, used my coffee maker, sat at my table, helped himself to the leftovers from the dinner I'd cooked. He was everything I was as a young male ambitious in ways Marcus recognized. He talked about branding and growth mindset and listened to Marcus's stories with wide admiring eyes. Marcus paraded at him like a trophy. They'd sit on my couch, watch my television, eat off my plates. He'd put his arm around Julian right in front of me, like I was furniture, like I'd already disappeared. The humiliation was useful. It gave me something to show, red eyes, trembling hands. The appearance of a woman whose world had collapsed, I leaned into it. I showed up to mediation sessions looking like I hadn't slept. I spoke softly, hesitantly, like I'd lost all confidence. I asked for so little that even the mediator seemed uncomfortable. I just want enough to start over, I said during our second session, voice cracking perfectly on schedule. I am not trying to be difficult. I know the business is Marcus's life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to tear our family apart more than it already is. I requested $50,000 cash, less than Marcus had originally offered, a detail that confused him enough to make him suspicious of my suspicion. My personal belongings, shared custody of Sophie, though I knew she'd choose to live with me full-time once she understood. That was it. Marcus agreed immediately. He'd been expecting me to fight for half of everything. That is what any reasonable lawyer would demand. Instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across that mediation table with something almost like pity, like I was a wounded animal he was graciously putting out of its misery. I deserved an Oscar for that performance, or at least a Golden Globe. Behind the scenes, Rebecca was preparing our legal strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce agreement stated clearly that I was relinquishing all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, the investment accounts, everything would go to Marcus. In exchange, I would receive my modest cash settlement and walk away, but attached to that agreement was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure statement. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to those assets. When Marcus signed for all assets, he would be legally assuming all liabilities. The mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The lease obligations, the personal loans, the balloon payments, all his problem alone. It was all there, in black and white. Legal, proper, devastating. Legal documents are like poetry, Rebecca told me. Boring, expensive poetry that can ruin someone's life. My favorite kind. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Richard Holloway called Rebecca with concerns. My client is assuming significant assets, he said carefully. I'd like to request a full financial audit before we finalize, just to verify everything. Rebecca kept her voice neutral. Of course, we'll provide whatever documentation you need. But when Richard brought this to Marcus, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut it down immediately. No audits, Parkes told him. I built that company. I know exactly what it is worth. I am not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know and I know. Richard pushed back. I strongly recommend we verify the asset values before you sign. This is significant. No, Marcus cut him off. Julian wants this done. I want this done. No more delays. Richard had been practicing law for 28 years. He knew when a client was about to make a mistake. He also knew he couldn't force someone to take his advice. He presented Marcus with a waiver, a document acknowledging that Richard had recommended an independent financial review and that Marcus was declining against counsel's advice. Marcus signed it without reading it, just like he'd sign everything else without reading it. Never underestimate the power of an impatient boyfriend to make a man skip the fine print. Julian was worth millions to me in legal strategy. Thursday, the 20th of June, 2024, 9 a.m. Multnomah County Courthouse, courtroom 7C. I remember every detail of that morning, the way the sunlight came through the tall windows, the smell of old wood and floor polish, the quiet murmur of lawyers shuffling papers. This was where 12 years of marriage would officially end, and where 4 years of patience would finally pay off. Marcus arrived first, of course, wearing his best suit, the Navy Hugo Boss I'd helped him pick out for a client conference 2 years ago. His new watch caught the light as he shook hands with Richard. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to close a very favorable deal. Julian was waiting in the hallway. He wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but he wanted to be there for moral support. I caught a glimpse of him through the door, perfect hair, designer bag, scrolling through his phone. Like this was just another boring appointment. Vivian was there too, sitting in the gallery, dressed up for the occasion, probably planning to take Marcus to a celebratory lunch. Afterward, she looked at me when I walked in and gave me that little smile. The kind you give someone you've already beaten. I arrived a few minutes after Marcus. Simple navy dress. No jewelry, hair pulled back in a low bun. I looked tired, defeated, like a woman who had nothing left to fight for. Perfect. I looked like someone who'd given up on life and fashion simultaneously. Very convincing. I should really teach acting classes. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and everyone rose. She was in her early 60s, silver hair, reading glasses perched on her nose. 30 years on the family court bench. She'd seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie that divorcing couples could throw at each other. Nothing surprised her anymore. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. Cole versus Cole. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Richard stood first. Yes, Your Honor. My client Marcus Cole is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, Cole and Associates, and all associated vehicles and accounts. In exchange, Mrs. Cole receives a cash settlement of $50,000. Rebecca rose beside me. That is correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Morrison's eyes moved to me. She studied my face for a moment, looking for signs of coercion, signs that I was being pressured into a bad deal. Mrs. Cole, she said, I need to confirm that you understand what you are agreeing to today. You are giving up your claim to substantial property, the family home, the business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, slightly unsteady. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you are entering this agreement voluntarily. No one is pressuring you. No, Your Honor. I looked down at my hands, then back up at her. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied me for another long moment. I could practically see her internal debate, whether to push harder, whether to order a continuance, whether to protect me from what looked like a terrible decision. But I was represented by counsel. I was answering clearly. I was an adult woman making my own choice. Very well, she said finally. Let's proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents. Page after page of legal language. Signatures required on every third page. Marcus signed eagerly, barely glancing at what he was agreeing to. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life with his new partner and his new freedom. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of my pen was careful and precise. This was the moment I'd been waiting 4 years for. I was going to savor it across the courtroom. I saw Marcus glance at Vivian and smile. She nodded back approvingly. In the hallway, his phone buzzed, probably Julian sending encouragement. He checked his phone in court during his own divorce hearing. That is the kind of man he was. Meanwhile, Richard Holloway was doing what good lawyers do, reviewing the complete document package one final time. Main agreements signed, asset schedule signed, settlement terms signed. Then he reached the addendum, the liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read, watched the confusion flicker across his features, watched him flip back a page, then forward again, like he was hoping he'd misread something. He hadn't. Richard's face went pale. He leaned toward Marcus, trying to be discreet. Sir, he whispered, we need to talk. Marcus waved him off, still basking in his victory. Not now. We're almost done. Done, sir. Richard's voice was more urgent. You are assuming all debt. Marcus turned to look at him. What? The liability disclosure. Richard whispered, papers rustling as he pointed. The mortgages, the business loans, it is all here. You are assuming personal liability for everything. For the first time, Marcus actually looked at what he'd signed. I watched his eyes scan the numbers. Watched the color drain from his face. House, $1.1 million owed. Market value, $975,000. Busyness, $340,000 in combined debts. Lines of credit frozen. Back taxes due. Vehicles, $45,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal liabilities, $200,000 in private loans. Total debt, approximately $1.7 million. Net value of everything he just claimed, negative $400,000. He hadn't won the lottery. He'd won the bully or shad-eyed owl. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't right. He looked at me, then at the judge, then back at the papers. She hid this from me. This is fraud. Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. Mr. Cole, sit down. These numbers are fake, Marcus insisted, his voice rising. She manipulated the documents. She, Mr. Cole. The judge's tone left no room for argument. Sit down. He sat. But his hands were shaking. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. Judge Morrison looked at the documents in front of her, then at Marcus. Mr. Cole, I am looking at the liability disclosure statement attached to this agreement. These are debts associated with assets. You are claiming assets in your name, your business, your property. She fixed him with a hard stare. Are you telling this court that you don't know your own financial situation? Silence, watching Marcus. Try to explain why he didn't know about his own debts was like watching a cat explain why there is a broken vase on the floor. Fascinating and completely unconvincing. Richard cleared his throat. Your Honor, I should note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He declined. I have documentation. He produced the waiver, the one Marcus had signed without reading, the one that said in clear legal language that Richard had recommended a full audit, and Marcus had refused. Judge Morrison reviewed it briefly, so Mr. Cole was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at Marcus. Is that correct? Is that correct? Marcus was staring at the waiver like it was a snake that had just bitten him. I thought, is that your signature, Miss Signature? Mr. Cole, a long pause. Yes. Then you assume this risk voluntarily. You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. The agreement stands. Marcus turned to me, desperation breaking through his composure. You knew? His voice cracked. You knew about all of this. I met his eyes calmly. I was your office manager for 6 years, Marcus. I knew about everything. His face cycled through emotions faster than I could count. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, and finally the one I've been waiting for, realization. The understanding that he'd done this to himself. I want to withdraw the agreement, Marcus said, turning back to the judge. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. It isn't fair. Judge Morrison shook her head. Mr. Cole, you signed documents before this court stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You declined additional review. Your wife did not hide anything. These are your debts, your mortgages, your obligations. She paused. The agreement is final. The gavel came down. Mrs. Cole, you have your settlement. Mr. Barad Cole, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, smoothed my dress, picked up my purse. Then I looked at Marcus one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him, his whole world collapsing around him. You said you wanted everything except Sophie, I said quietly. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, I could hear Marcus's voice rising, yelling at Richard, demanding to know how this happened, how'd running lawsuits. Richard's calm responses, I told you to get a nod at it. I have it in write-in. You refused. Through the glass doors, I saw Julian's face change as he listened. Saw him look at Marcus, really look at Julian, and see something other than the successful businessman he thought he was getting. He was gone before I reached the elevator, moving fast, not looking back. Julian's exit was faster than his entrance into my marriage. At least he was consistent. I stepped outside into the June sunshine to the June sunshine. The sky was blue. The air was warm. Somewhere behind me, my ex-husband was screaming at his lawyer about fairness and fraud and how none of this was his fault. Ahead of me was a new life. Smaller than before, simpler, but completely entirely mine. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Julian had moved out of the house, packed his things in the middle of the night, left a note that said, "This isn't what I signed up for." Within a month, Marcus tried to sell the house, but when you owe more than something is worth, there are no buyers. Just banks calling about missed payments, and realtors suggesting short sales. Within 2 months, Cole and associates started defaulting. Clients left when they heard about the financial instability. Vendors filed lawsuits. The line of credit was frozen. The company Marcus had spent 12 years building. The company I had spent 6 years supporting. It crumbled into dust. Within 3 months, Marcus was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The man who'd once bragged about his empire was now calculating which assets he could protect from creditors. The answer was almost nothing. Vivian's perfect son was calling family members, asking for loans, showing up at relatives' houses with excuses and explanations. Nobody knew about the debt. Elena must have hidden it somehow. I was tricked, but the documents told a different story. The mortgages were in his name, the loans were in his name, the gambling debts, the crypto losses, the secret apartment, all his choices, all his signatures. I heard that Vivian's Christmas newsletter that year was very short. Marcus is exploring new opportunity. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. Sophie understood eventually, not because I explained it, but because she figured it out herself. She saw the court documents. She heard her father's excuses. She watched Julian leave, watched Vivian scramble, watched the whole facade collapse. One evening, about a month after the divorce, she sat with me in my new apartment, the one with the yellow kitchen I'd painted myself because it reminded me of sunlight. The one with the secondhand furniture and the boxes finally unpacked. You waited 4 years, she said quietly. You knew this whole time and you just waited. Waited. I wanted to make sure you were protected, I told her. Whatever happened between your father and me, I needed to know you'd be okay. She was quiet for a moment, and then she hugged me, really. Hugged me. The kind of hug I hadn't gotten from my 12-year-old daughter in months. The kind that said, I understand. The kind that said, I am proud of you. 12-year-old girls don't usually hug their mothers voluntarily. I knew I'd done something right. My $50,000 settlement went toward getting established, first month's rent, security deposit, basic furniture. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was. Sophie's future college, maybe a first home someday, a safety net that nobody could take from her. And me? I enrolled in the CPA program at Portland State, the degree I'd put on hold when I was 21 to help Marcus build his empire. I was finally building my own. I started small. My first real client was a woman named Margaret, 58 years old, just ending a 32-year marriage. She was standing in her empty new apartment, looking lost, when she asked me, how do you start over? I thought about it for a moment, one room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time. We painted her kitchen yellow. She cried when she saw it. Happy tears, she said. The color of new beginnings. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, not the healthy kind, dark circles under his eyes. His suit was wrinkled. His watch was gone. He looked like a man who'd been through a war and lost. He stood in my doorway, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I didn't know it was this bad, he said. His voice was small. I made mistakes. I know that now, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I leaned against my doorframe and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd loved for almost half my life. This man who'd thrown me away like garbage. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. Can we talk? He asked. Maybe we can figure something out. I don't know. Maybe he couldn't even finish the sentence. Couldn't bring himself to ask for what he actually wanted, help. My help after everything. You asked for everything except Sophie, I said calmly. You got exactly what you wanted. Elena, please, goodbye, Marcus. I closed the door. He stood in the hallway for 10 minutes. I know, because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. Best show I'd ever seen. 5 stars. Would watch again. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at my mother's photo on the shelf. The recipe box was next to it. The one thing Vivian had tried to take. The one thing that mattered most. You were right about everything, Mom, I said quietly. Keep your own money. Know your worth. And never let anyone make you feel small. The apartment was quiet. Nothing like the house I'd lived in for 12 years, but it was mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision. And for the first time and longer than I could remember, I was free. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, ever been invisible, ever waited for your moment, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I read every single one. More stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss what happens next. See you there.